We've had a couple of questions that sound like people who are kind of early to the ADHD diagnosis. Contextually, just as like a pattern that happens for most folks, nothing is true for everybody, but for most folks, when you first get that diagnosis, it's not that your ADHD is suddenly worse. It's that you're suddenly more informed and noticing way more of the areas of your life that ADHD affects. And that can be overwhelming. That can slam you with guilt and shame and trauma and all the stuff we've already talked about today. But also know that that's normal. Bring some self-compassion, bring some self-forgiveness. Unfortunately, you just kind of have to ride that out as you learn and get better at managing your ADHD, or the meds kick in, or whatever the case may be. You'll get to the other side of that, but it's going to feel more acute for a little while, and then you'll get to the other side of that. So know that that's there.
ADHD Rewired, episode 366. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. We are here for our live Q&A. It is February 9th, 2021. We have our typical gang of panelists here, starting with Will Curb from Hacking Your ADHD. Hey, Will.
Good to be here.
We have Brendan Mahan from ADHD Essentials.
Hi, everyone.
We have MJ Siemens from probably by the time this is out, the actual ADHD Diversified podcast, because it's probably going to be out this week, guys.
Uh-oh. What am I doing with my life? Hello, everybody.
And Moira Maybin of the soon-to-be ADHD-friendly lifestyle podcast.
Bringing up the rear. Here I am.
I love only on an ADHD podcast and network can all of our announced launches just be profoundly delayed and late, and it's all okay.
Some things came up.
Some things did come up. So we will talk a little bit more about those podcasts here in a little bit. But first, we have the lovely Ella, who is going to be asking us our first question.
I think it was something about, I notice a relationship between difficult feelings and ADHD behavior. Like, in other words, I can just go into high dither mode when I'm trying to avoid something unpleasant. Does anyone else feel that way? And what do you suggest?
Yes.
Well, I think that understanding ADHD primarily as a disorder of self-regulation, gives it the context of, oh, that makes sense then, right? And even looking at one of the more common ADHD behaviors, procrastination. I mean, at the essence, procrastination is avoiding uncomfortable feelings, right? So I guess one, recognizing what you're sort of up against, so you understand sort of what it is, and it's part of the whole syndrome of ADHD. But then looking at what are the things that are helpful for whatever it is you're trying to face. Because are there times when distracting yourself to sort of get yourself regulated is a good strategy? Sure. Right. Are there other times, and maybe more times, where it's not a helpful strategy? Yeah. So is there a specific sort of area in this, Ella, that you want to explore a little bit?
Well, I noticed it the other day when there'd been just some group interactions in which I did not feel good about myself. And it's familiar. I know those thoughts, so I can work with the thoughts that tell me all the things they tell me. But the impulse was I knew that that's what I was doing, but I didn't seem to be able to interrupt it.
Which I very much relate to.
It was taking place late in the evening, so there wasn't really anyone I could call to help me.
Well, when we look at ADHD as this idea that like we know what to do, but we don't always do what we know, like sort of knowing you're doing something in the moment that's not what you want to be doing and not being able to change course, like that very much is when we look at ADHD as a performance disorder. It's like, all right, brain, I know what I want to be doing. Come on. And it won't cooperate. And I think you mentioned it was in the evening, which is, in the evening is when our executive functions are sort of less available because we've been kind of spending them all day.
I wish you could see me shaking my head up and down.
We will take your word for it. We'll all shake our Ella bobblehead. What about the rest of you? Any thoughts that you want to share on this, whether it's new information or just relating to it?
So one of the things that I'm thinking immediately, specifically around dithering, is sometimes dithering and puttering and all that stuff is like a less focused effort or attempt to get some dopamine flowing, right? Like you're like, I need some dope, and not that you're doing it on purpose, just sort of subconscious, like I need to accomplish something to get the ball rolling, but you're not really engaging in any tasks that feel like the ball is rolling when you do them. Like you're like, I picked up this napkin and threw it in the trash, and I guess that's something, but it doesn't really help. So when you catch yourself dithering, it might be useful to wonder, right? Like, am I doing this because I have something that I need to engage in or do? And I'm trying to get the dopamine rolling so I can engage or do the thing.
Moira?
One of the things that's become more apparent to me too is the emotional connection between our executive function, our ability to plan and manage and organize. And so if we only have a certain amount and then there's emotions tied into that as well, it makes the whole thing more taxing, as opposed to something that is either a routine that we don't necessarily have to think as much about. And so being aware that just having those uncomfortable feelings can make the task in itself harder. And yeah, doing things at the end of the day. I mean, if that's where, Ella, your biggest struggle is, then for me, it's about practicing doing stuff earlier in the day, moving stuff around.
Yeah, especially if we are planning stuff in the morning for our late afternoon. I mean, that's...
I'm like, who was the person who thought this was a good idea?
Totally.
Right?
So Ella, I hope that helps.
It helps to know that there's such understanding that you have. And it's really comforting.
Well, thanks for asking the question, Ella. All right, let's go to another question. Let's see. I'm kind of interested on this the third question down by Judith, because I have no idea what this even is. What are your thoughts on QB check? Anyone know what QB check is? Anyone?
I looked it up just a minute ago. It's an online tool for diagnosing ADHD. So I think that tells you where Eric's going to stand with, not having something in person.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it other than what Will just told me. While Will, you were looking up QB check, I was looking up the word dither because I was like, I didn't actually know what that word meant. And
I love that word.
And then I was reading the definition and I was like, I actually still don't understand it. So I just wanted to share that. Because I know it as a sound like principle, but yeah. Anyways, QB check. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. I mean, I do think, any kind of online test for ADHD or assessment for ADHD it's a starting point, right? But it's not diagnostic. It's not because so much when I used to do work diagnosis when I was, as a clinician, and one of the things that I think is really that you can't get in the rating scales is like the way somebody tells their story. and the little nuances. And like, so that is, so yeah, if this QB check is a way to get a score on something, bring it to your doctor as a starting point. Right. Like I said, the same thing for any of these online assessments. I know like Adhd magazine has assessments that you can get online and like other things like that, but that's not diagnostic. It's a starting point. So I guess I learned something new there. All right. Let's see. Another question. Stephanie asked, I used to be able to consume like about books. I used to be able to consume. I think there's a word missing. I was just trying to figure it out in real time.
I got you. I got the gist of this one. You want me to pull you out of it?
Please.
I used to be able to consume like about a book a week, I think is what she's trying to say, in high school. But now I'm terrible at reading real books, not Twitter or web articles. Apparently she can read those. Is this a me thing or an ADHD thing? If I can just be like I was an English teacher and drop the authority bomb on this one. And not that anyone else can't answer stuff too, but like context matters for a second here. Reading is a muscle. So if you're like, I used to be able to run a marathon in high school and now I can't run up the stairs. Yeah, because you stopped running. Like probably you don't read as much. And so you're not reading a full book anymore because it's hard. It's like running a marathon or running a mile or whatever. Read books. Like the way to get that back is to just do the thing. And that doesn't mean you read a book a week. It means you start reading a book and you keep going until you're done. And then you pick up another one. And maybe eventually you read a book a week and maybe you don't, because as full grown adults, there's no expectation that we're reading a book and we don't get any credit for reading the book. And we don't set time aside to read the book. We kind of fit the book around the time that is otherwise occupied by 107 different things that are more important than reading that book. So it's going to be a different experience in adulthood.
And making sure we're reading books we like.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I had to when I was, and also what else are you doing in your life? When I was doing really things that were quite challenging, I had to switch I would read, YA fiction because it was easier and I could go through it and it would take less brain power.
We also have this idea from our past that what we used to do was like this like monumental task. And then we look back, like I went back and read some of the books I read as a kid and I'm like, these were long books. And I'm like, I read those in hours now. I read much longer books and much more complicated books now. And so reading them at the same pace wouldn't work. And then there's this whole thing with, what else are you doing in your life now? Because when we were in high school, it felt like we had a lot of responsibility. As adults, I'm like, I don't have time to do anything I want anymore.
It's all relative. It's yeah. It's interesting because like I was not a reader until I was diagnosed in college, because I like could not keep my I would read, but my brain didn't know what I was reading. Right. And then when I started taking medication, it was like, oh my gosh, I can read a chapter and I actually know what I just read. Like it was actually amazing. And then like in grad school, I was really enjoying the stuff I was reading. And even after grad school, like I read a gazillion books on ADHD when I decided that, I want to really bring my attention on clinically, like to focus exclusively on this. And then I discovered audiobooks, and I am like a huge advocate for just the idea that there's more than one way to read. I read with my ears, and it is no less of a reading than reading with your eyes. So just to sort of put that out there for all those people that say that, audiobooks are cheating, we're going to have some words because I disagree with you.
So do the brain scans.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're right.
Yay.
Yeah. And then it's always me and Moira fighting for talking. Go ahead, Moira.
Den's his fighting words. It's because we inspire each other. I loved reading, and not getting diagnosed until a few years ago. It was a major coping strategy for me because it would contain my brain and give it a direction. And I also really liked words. But I do know that some people find it really hard to have extended reading periods. Personally, as a teacher, I have also always thought it's what you're reading. You really need to enjoy what you're reading. But when I was healing from my brain injury, listening to Audible books was amazing. And I still do that. I go back and forth sometimes because just being able to listen to whatever it is.
Even Audible and Kindle too, right? Like I was looking at, a little while ago, I picked up a book to read, and every now and then, I don't know what button I'm messing with on my Kindle, but every now and then I get like this is how long this book is going to take you to read. And sometimes that goes away, and I wish it would stick around because I like that you've read this much of the book and here's how many hours or whatever you have left. But I was reading the end of a series that I had been going through, and it was the initial estimate of how long it would take me to read this book was 40 hours. And I was like, this is like working full time for a week to get this book read. So if you're like, I used to read a book a week, what kind of books are you reading? Because if they're like 400 and 500 pages like that one was, that's a full-time job. Like, of course you're not going to read that in a week. You have a full-time job at this point. So pay attention to that stuff too. And Audible can do the same thing. Audible is like, if I read this book to you, it's going to take this long. And that's helpful. It's helpful to know what that time frame is. And for those of you in the chat, graphic novels completely count. As a guy who ran a conference on graphic novels, 25th anniversary of A Contract with God by Will Eisner, when he was in college, and majored in comic art as an undergrad, graphic novels count. And now I'll shut up.
You can change the speed on Audible books. That was, I couldn't do it when it was one time, the regular speed.
To go along with that too, sometimes I do have a little bit of trouble staying with the page and I get distracted. A fun strategy I've come up with, get the Kindle version and the Audible version, read while listening. It keeps me right on track of where I'm supposed to be. There is like a whisper sync feature that is atrocious because it tries to highlight where you're supposed to be reading, but it's not actually where the spoken words is, and it's not good. It makes me really unhappy.
Tell us how you feel about this, Will.
When someone finds that technology, when you can have an audiobook and an ebook working well together, let us know. But
yeah, it really helps center what you're reading. And it made it so that I could take notes at the same time. And I found that I don't do that for fiction, but for nonfiction, it's very helpful.
All right, let's go to another question. I want to go to Eileen's question here. Eileen.
While you were talking, I was sorting through some not unpaid bills, but just stuff that I don't get to right away. And it was on a little side table. And as I passed it, it fell on the floor. It fell out of the container. And so I thought this is the perfect time. So I was sorting. And as I said, most of it would get thrown out anyway. And so in a way, that brings me to my question. I'm older, and neural therapy, etc., neuropsychology had not caught up to the 70s with them knowing what to do. And so finally I've been diagnosed as having complex PTSD, which is trauma from your childhood that continues, especially if your parents lived to a very old age. And I find that I do have, this is the first time I'm online with you guys. And that what brought me there was, and I can't think of her name, the young lady who's incredible, who does the show on ADHD.
Jessica McCabe.
Yeah, she is amazing. So the question has come up again. I have a lot of the same issues. I have hyperfocus, so nobody ever thought, and I'm a writer, so I can work on anything for 5 hours at a time. It's the switching that's hard. I get overwhelmed, and therefore I don't want to do things, but I take care of all tasks, bills, getting shopping, making the list. So but the things that are really important to me, I get anxious about, which I didn't used to. So there are probably reasons for that being in my life. So my question is, can you give me your opinion, some insights into the difference distinguishing between ADHD and complex PTSD, and I realized they overlap. So I really am calling for your insight because I was really impressed with your sites. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your question. This is over the years, just like this idea of trauma and complex PTSD is just keeps coming up just really, really often. And I see it often in my groups, and I think people are starting to recognize the pervasiveness of trauma in our culture and in society. I think just all of us right now, even just going through a year of a pandemic, like there's not going to be like a person out there who doesn't have some form of trauma, right? Like it affects us all differently. And I think one thing to understand about trauma, that it's not even necessarily what happens to you. It's how you experience and process and internalize what happens to you, right? So while there may be sort of on a observable like symptom level, some overlap between ADHD, I think that probably more likely when we're looking at, is it complex PTSD? Is it ADHD? The answer is usually yes. Right. And I think, one of the big things that I see is that the experience of living life undiagnosed with ADHD, that's freaking traumatic. To be told over and over again in all different kinds of ways by all different kinds of people, you're wrong, you're stupid, you're lazy, if you just tried harder, what were you thinking? And and that was the experience growing up for so many people with undiagnosed ADHD. And even those who were diagnosed, who understood why they were having a hard time. And I think not being understood for so many years of your life is traumatic, right? One of the things that we know about trauma, though, is that trauma lives in our body. And so there's this hyper-arousal sort of element to trauma. We talk about like people being triggered. What they're talking about is a hyper sort of responsive central nervous system, right? Where different things can send you over the edge, whatever that kind of looks like, or whatever that means. So the therapies itself are inherently different. One is looking at how do we get back into our body? Because, when you're looking at treatments for complex PTSD, so much of it is body focused. It's not about talking about your trauma. It's about like getting in touch, leaning in to the body, becoming more aware of the body. There's a lot of therapies for trauma that specifically sort of like talking about your trauma isn't what we do here, right? Which may seem counterintuitive. But trauma lives in the body. And if anyone has read the book that I think has really just changed the face of how even clinicians are understanding trauma, is The Body Keeps Score. It's an eye-opening book. So if you're interested in that, explore that.
Yes, I'm aware of that. And they also know that the things that work best also are meditation and self-compassion work. And I've done a lot of research, polyvagal and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So you've really confirmed what I know. And I just want to add that I realized therapists did their best with what they knew. But of course, traditional therapy was spending years and decades talking about this stuff. And as I said, since my mom lived till 95, it was ongoing. It wasn't like the trauma was from 20, it was like till 70, So I thank you. And I picked up some of the tips. But the one thing I want to add that really brought me to you today is that I thought I would start a bullet journal.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing overwhelmed me and made me so anxious. And I have to laugh. And then I just said, okay, you can't. Why increase your anxiety? So I want to thank you very much. You're welcome.
If I can chime in real quick.
Go ahead. And then we're going to go to break.
Yeah, just because this might be helpful. And I'll throw a link in the chat here. I interviewed Dr. Richard Tedeschi, who is the guy who coined the term and did the research on post-traumatic growth. So just to kind of look at that other side of trauma may be helpful. So I'll put the link in the chat for that episode of ADHD Essentials.
Cool. Thanks, Brendan. All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will carry on with your questions. So we will be right back. Internationally recognized by CHAD as one of the top innovative programs out there, ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups, now going into our 24th season, have helped more than 600 adults with ADHD learn and grow in ways they never thought possible. With the end of registration for our spring sessions less than 2 weeks away, I want you to really hear what is possible.
There is more to my ADHD than I realized. There's a framework for understanding it and a framework for dealing with it that really has set me up for success, I think, in ways that I didn't even understand were possible.
When I heard that this is 10 weeks and there are so many checkpoints, I wasn't sure I could actually do it that long. I had so many classes where I dropped out pretty much at the 4th week mark. But all of the accountability and my A-team and all that compassionate ass-kicking, planning and routines helped me complete this.
Other things that sort of drew me to this group was the accountability. The accountability can be such a good tool for learning rather than just like a trigger for shame if you ask someone who actually gets it.
Putting the skills and strategies that we have been learning about throughout ARC into action, it feels like opening your eyes for the first time without ever realizing they had been shut in the first place. You just an entire new world of like, I can do this, like I can do these things. Like it solidifies what you see as possible for yourself.
My family and friends have already noticed a huge difference in me. I'm not late for everything anymore. I don't forget everything all the time. And more than anything, I'm just not stressed all the time.
Didn't expect to feel so much lighter and so much more accepting of myself. Yeah, I'll admit, I was like, I'm here for the skills. I know the skills, but I need to be better at implementing them. And I wasn't expecting to be like so much more effective than most of the therapy I've had. And I'm a therapist. Like, I really believe in therapy, but in terms of daily functioning, it's just been total game changer.
Twice this week, I have gotten all my work done early. And I didn't feel completely exhausted at the end of the day. And that's been incredible.
Part of the reason why I joined the group was for the accountability. I knew what I should be able to do. I knew the techniques and the tools, and I just couldn't stick to them. And I think that the accountability with your accountability group within the whole ARC community and going forward, I know that I'm going to need that accountability still. And that's why I'm definitely joining the alumni group. The accountability too, still the questions of helping you to dig a little deeper and figure out, well, what is it? What's this little road bump about?
I used to think that my tasks were in control of me. I would feel like a failure if I didn't get them all done. And now that I schedule everything and I can move them around at my will, I've made that decision. So to me, that's a success.
This isn't a crash course where you meet a bunch of cool people and make a bunch of brand new friends and everything's great for 10 weeks and then you go back to your regular life. This is integrating tools and new understanding about yourself that you carry on into the rest of your life. And in addition to that, not just with the A-teams that we are in and the members of our group that we build relationships with that are obviously going to carry on, but that also by being part of the same mighty network as the alumni community, I already feel like I'm part of this larger continuing organization. I don't feel like I'm going to be left back to my own devices. It feels wonderful.
Not until this group, I didn't realize how much I fake it, pretend that I'm normal and just diminish myself, masking who I am. And there's so much to celebrate. Like, I should own my weird and be more myself because that is what makes me me.
Joining this group, I came for tools. I came to learn some things that would make me understand, but I came out with a family. So I have a rebirth. I have transformed.
ARC teaches the skills that pills don't teach and that nobody else taught us along the way.
Yeah, if you're thinking about joining this group, It was worth the money for me. Frankly, it's been more effective than years of therapy because of the day-to-day feedback. And like, I feel like people really get to know each other really fast.
Accountability doesn't have to be unpleasant or sticky or thorny, because with the right people, we can accomplish more than we'd ever thought possible. So it's also true that no one succeeds alone. This group is like finding missing pieces to a puzzle that you didn't know were missing. Now I can finish my puzzle, put that one away, admire it for the work that was put into it, and finally move on to the next puzzle. And if you're thinking about joining this group, really and truly, the only thing I can say is go for it. I hesitated the first time I considered joining, and my only qualm now is that I didn't start sooner. This is a group for ADHDers by an ADHDer. I am better because of it. All of us here are better because of it. And if I could do it again, you can bet I would in a heartbeat.
Our final registration event for our next season of coaching and accountability groups is less than 2 weeks away. It's on Thursday, March 18th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. For those of you who sent your intro videos to us, we are reviewing the submissions now and will contact you soon. Also, we recently recognized that some of you have signed up for our email list for this season and have not received the email instructions for registration. We are looking into this issue. If you are interested and haven't received any follow-up information, go to coachingrewired.com and click on the green button. It will take you directly to the instructions for registration. If you have any questions, send a message to support@ADHDrewired.com. We are offering 3 groups this season. 2 I am facilitating. 1 Moira Maybin is facilitating. To see the details and pricing for each of our sessions, go to coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. And we are back. All right. Do we have another question lined up? All right. Let's see. Open questions. Here we are. What do you think about cannabis use with a patient who is using stimulants? My answer to that question, so I do not think that marijuana is a treatment for ADHD. I'm also not against marijuana, but not as a treatment for ADHD, right? Like if you want to smoke it, eat it, consume it in any way you want to, because it helps you relax and it's not impairing you and you're not like, same thing with like alcohol. It's like use responsibly, right? But the studies that are currently out there, and there are a growing number of studies that are out there, it is counterindicated for ADHD. And what's interesting is that the things that some people with ADHD say it helps with, over time, it will exacerbate those same symptoms, right? So the chronic sort of long-term use, it's impairing. As someone who may or may not have ever used before, it may or may not have a completely affected working memory. So that's a huge area of ADHD that, if you have a hard enough time holding on to a thought, right? Smoking pot ain't going to help.
Add on to that too, smoking pot will also affect your executive function to get things done. So if you're having trouble activating, that won't help at all either.
Sometimes I like to refer to it as herbal apathy. It helps because you just don't care.
Can I throw some broad-based wild speculation that is not specifically aimed at marijuana?
Sure.
This is where I'm kind of landing, and I don't have any scientific backup on this. So that's why I'm saying broad-based wild speculation. Okay. But every now and then we come across something that's like, this fixes everything. It's magic. And marijuana kind of fits in that category. This is where I'm landing on my assumptions for that stuff. I'm landing on that thing probably does something for anxiety, because anxiety touches everything. So it seems like it's helping with whatever your thing is, but maybe it's really just diminishing some anxiety somewhere. And I don't know that I'm right about this, but that's my wild speculation at the moment that I don't have time to study.
A couple of years ago, I attended a session at the CHAD conference. It was one of the research symposiums on marijuana. And what they said is that it does help in short term, but then what happens is people will become chronic users, and then you need to smoke more and more to relieve the same sort of symptoms, which get worse and worse over time. So, you know, and the other thing is too, it's like there's so much like variability in even just strains that like marijuana is not just marijuana, right? Like what kind, it's like, you know, oh, I ran out of Zoloft, so I'll take Paxil today. It's like, it doesn't, you know, it's sort of the equivalent of like, you wouldn't do that, right? Like, crap, like I don't even like when my generic medication goes to a different manufacturer. I'm like, crap, like I'm probably going to have like some weird side effects, right? So I just think it's, you know, let's just be honest about what we're talking about, right? Like if you want to get high, be careful, have fun, you know, be responsible. But as far as like what the evidence to this point shows, smoking as a long-term treatment, counterindicated, and will make a lot of symptoms worse. That's what the science currently shows. Okay. All right. I like the question though. What's the difference between understimulation with ADHD and depression? They can, I sort of like can visualize a sort of a Venn diagram there. So, you know, the ADHD brain is an underactive brain, despite the body sometimes being, you know, overactive. I think part of it is with that, the idea of activation is like, it takes more, like you need more to kind of keep yourself regulated. With depression, it's kind of this more of a state of, and you remember those commercials that it was like depression hurts, like depression hurts. Like there's a physical aspect to depression, right? You know, as someone who's has had many depressive episodes throughout my life. Yeah, like depression sucks. It's the variability isn't so much of like, this morning it took me like hours to get going, right? Like depression is like, from January to March has just kind of been blah, right? I mean, there's different kinds of depression, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of as a general sort of the differences. Activity can generally more activate the brain, whereas depression, it's not so much of the external cues to activate the brain. It is more internal, having a hard time getting activated. I hope that made sense. I think I was rambling there for a little bit. Anyone want to answer that or clarify what I just said?
Yeah, as a guy who was only really hit to significant depression, I think once. And it was after my mom passed away.
I think they call that grief, by the way.
Yeah. My impression is that like, and you kind of said this a little, like is depression is like long-term and sort of in understimulation, inability to activate for ADHD is more short-term. And acute is not the right word because I don't want to like go to the pain part of it, but like, it's like I feel like I need to do this thing, but I just can't.
Well, acute depression clinically is.
That's why I don't want to. Well, I'm like, that's me trying to find a word and not liking it.
But I want to say it's from a clinical standpoint, it's 6 months or less of depressive symptoms.
Right. Okay. Yeah. What I lost it.
Do you mean?
I was about to elaborate why acute sucked and where I was going.
Do you mean more situational?
Yeah, situational. Let's do that. That works. Because it's sort of like I want to do the thing, but it's just not happening, kind of. And I don't know. And again, I've only depression once, but I didn't want to do the thing. Even if I knew it was there, I was like, oh, that's a thing that I should do, I guess, but whatever. Whereas with ADHD, I'm more like, oh, that's a thing and I should do it. And I kind of even want to, but like that doesn't mean that I'm actually doing it or getting any closer to doing it, despite my desire. Like that's there, at least for me, in my understimulated, lack of activation ADHD moments.
Can I add, as someone who's had a number of episodes, and I think a lot of them were related to untreated ADHD, but ones weren't. And for me, there was a real difference between the wanting to and when I would think that I'm depressed as opposed to understimulated or being treated that way. It's really like, not only is the things that I think I should be doing or want to be doing are almost more academic than that there's actually a desire to do it. When I'm having a hard time coping, say my ADHD wasn't being treated or I was understimulated, there was still a huge part of me that wanted to be doing those things. It was just getting the activation to get going.
Yeah. I hope that helps. All right, let's take another question. We're going to go ask Brenda, who said she'll go live, has a question about executive function coaching.
Hi.
Hi, Brenda.
So my question is, so I cannot teach my child executive function skills because I don't have them myself. So I want to get him some coaching, and it's costly. It's not cheap, but I have the means to do that right now. And we joined in something, and we have a coach, and a wonderful guy like him. He doesn't have ADHD. And for some reason, I want him to have ADHD so he can know that the struggle's real. Is that accurate, or am I just, making this all up? I don't know.
So I have two thoughts on this, and they're sort of competing. Which is okay because we're dynamic people. That on one hand, I totally get the idea of really wanting to work with a professional who has ADHD because it sort of feels like you don't really get it until you live it.
Yeah.
But I also think in some ways that may be a kind of closed-minded and because I think there are also good clinicians and coaches who are actually good at understanding ADHD. So I wouldn't completely dismiss someone that doesn't have ADHD, but I think that we typically feel pretty quickly whether or not this person actually gets it. It's in the subtle things they say. It's in the how they respond to the struggle that we're having. It's how often do they use the word just as in, oh, you just have to do this, or it's
right.
So I think that there are good coaches and clinicians out there who don't have ADHD, right? I think that a lot of the really good ones do, though. So that's
right.
Right. And so it's with any relationship, you gotta feel it out a little bit, and because there are coaches and clinicians who do have ADHD who are probably not really good.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. All right.
I agree with Eric, and also Eric, I know that you had said to me before, it's okay to have neurotypical allies who are in the ADHD field, because there is a different perspective. The flip side to what you also said is when we are looking for a coach or somebody to show us those skills, we also want to see, at least for me, to see somebody who has ADHD, who is also doing really well. And it's almost they're the example of what's possible for us. And having, finding our people, because ADHD people, we've got our people. So that's just kind of what I wanted to say.
I also really like productivity-based books that are not from people with ADHD, because it's sort of how do the neurotypicals do it, right? And so I will take what they're doing and then adapt it towards something that's more ADHD friendly. So that's sort of that component of it. All right, Brendan, go ahead.
Brenda teleported, so I can't ask my clarifying questions.
Okay.
But I want to point something out. Brenda is neurotypical, and this is a coach for her kid. So the indicators of oh, this person doesn't get it, Brenda's not going to notice those indicators because she kind of doesn't get it either.
Neurotypical?
She said she was neurotypical.
Okay. All right.
I think.
I missed that. I don't know.
Pretty sure.
And I'm not totally sure either.
And then the other piece is your kid, depending on their age, they might not catch those indications either, because if they're 8, 9, 10, they're just no one gets me, right? Big picture, my parents don't get me, my teacher doesn't get me, no one gets me, now my coach doesn't get me. So this isn't me saying the coach should have ADHD, because I'm not, but I do want to say that it's going to be harder to read those non-obvious signals. That said, if the coach is working out, if it seems to be doing okay, stick with that coach. I'm not here to be like, the coach that you have that you just said is doing a good job, fire them and hire somebody with ADHD. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, keep the person who's doing a good job, but talk to your kid and make it as clear as possible and as safe as possible that you want to hear from them about what the experience is like for them. Because you might think the coach is doing great and the kid might be miserable and you just don't know. So have those kinds of conversations with your son or daughter as well.
Excellent points. She did clarify in the chat. She's not neurotypical. But having had many different helpers in my life and only the recent history, knowing that it was ADHD, you do, like, once you know you have ADHD, that whole yeah, but, and I know one of the things there is that yeah, but of, am I not being seen and heard and understood, as opposed to that yeah, but they're asking me to do something challenging and I'm uncomfortable with it.
We're going to take a quick break and we will be right back to answer some more questions. Would you like to have a virtual co-working space for adults with ADHD? Would you like to be a founding member of ADHD Rewired's Adult Study Hall membership community, which we are aiming to open at the end of March? Did I mention that the first 100 members, our founders, will get to lock in 50% off their membership for life? Get 24-hour access to virtual co-working with a variety of facilitated themed work sessions throughout the week for only $19.99 a month and only $9.99 a month for the first 100 founding members. You'll never have to work alone again. To become a founder, go to adultstudyhall.com. That's adultstudyhall.com. If you are new to ADHD Rewired, welcome. You can check out all the other podcasts that we have here by clicking on the podcast tab over at ADHDrewired.com. In addition to this one, you'll find ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan and Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, and our newest podcast, ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens. And coming at the end of March, the ADHD-friendly lifestyle with ADHD Rewired coach Moira Maybin. And if you're catching this early enough on Tuesday, March 9th, and it's before 12:30 p.m. Central, come join the entire ADHD Rewired podcast network family for an hour of live Q&A. We do this every second Tuesday of the month. To register, go to ADHDrewired.com/events. If you want to ask us a question that may be featured on the podcast, please wear headphones and be in a quiet space. That's ADHDrewired.com/events. We hope to see you there. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from patrons who support us over on Patreon. If you are new to this podcast or you're a longtime listener, welcome. One of the ways you can show your support for ADHD Rewired is to become a patron. And we would like to welcome our newest patrons, Amanda W. at the $25 a month level. We hope to see you at next month's coaching call. And Joanna W. at the $5 a month level. Thank you so much for your support. Patrons who give $5 a month or more can subscribe to the ad-free version of this podcast. $10 a month patrons get ad-free episodes and recordings of our monthly coaching calls that you can join by becoming a patron at the $25 a month level. Monthly patron-only coaching calls are every fourth Tuesday of the month at 3 p.m. Central. To become a patron, go to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon or just click the Patreon tab at the top of ADHDrewired.com. And thanks. All right, we are back. Karen has a question about medication and life. So, Karen, go ahead with your question. You just got to unmute yourself there. I think Karen maybe stepped away from her device. Possibly. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll go on to another
See, that's
question.
where you should be gonging someone.
That should be the gong. I shouldn't just like be cueing Brendan's voice.
Hello.
There we go. All right. All right. We're getting a little silly here. Karen did want to know. She said that I am on medication, but I'm still missing appointments and losing track of my life. What works? So it's a very simple question. Pills don't teach skills, right? It's like, just because you're starting to take medication doesn't mean any of the life skills, executive functioning skills, like magically it like comes online. So
also, if you keep all your cereal in the same place, it's easier to keep track of it. That's how I know where my life is. You guys.
Oh my God.
No?
Got it.
That was so bad.
Like what?
Oh my gosh. Brendan, okay. All right.
Mine's in the board game cabinet.
Also a good plan.
Love that game.
Really? We want to do this unmedicated? Really? Okay. Let's keep going then. So Caroline asked, what are the best strategies for prioritizing at work when everything feels urgent? Oh, I like this question. Because so I'm going to first recommend the book, The One Thing. It is not an ADHD specific book, but it is a book that we actually require our coaching group members to read before coming to the group. Because, the ADHD brain tends to prioritize based on proximity, not priority, right? So whatever is the loudest, brightest, shiniest, and just grabbing your attention, that's what is going to feel is the most important, which is a horrible way to prioritize because it's never actually what's most important. So looking at understanding how our brain fools us into prioritization, and so as a starting point, so we can learn that, our brain's feeding us lies all day long about what is actually important. So we can have a strategy to respond to those things. One, we tend to be amazing firefighters, but we have to let the fires burn because they're not actually on fire. We just really think they are. There's a lot of false alarms going off in our life all day long. So unless you're an actual firefighter or paramedic or emergency response person, like most people's like quote unquote emergencies, they can wait 2 hours. Right? They can probably wait 4 hours. They can probably wait a day. Most of those people will solve those problems on their own. Right? So that's one thing. The expression, what is it? A person who chases two rabbits catches none. Right? Like identify that thing that is most important to you, and everything else is a distraction. In the book, The One Thing, they talk about the domino effect, which is not just that one knocks over the other, but the idea of one can knock over a bigger one and that one can knock over a bigger one. So it's really identifying the thing that is going to help make everything easier over time. I think that one of the most helpful ways to prioritize when you have a lot of stuff and you feel overwhelmed is to recruit somebody else to share your list with. It's sort of that idea of like, you don't see the mess in your home until other people come over. Like once you start actually sharing your list with other people, you start to see it differently. And you'll probably be able to identify on your own what is actually most important. And when you can't, you just ask somebody else, hey, what do you think I need to be doing?
And be strategic in who you share that with, because this question is specifically about work, right? So things you might want to consider. Your boss might have no idea how much stuff you're doing and might just keep giving you things because they don't realize that you're doing an insane number of things. One way to share with your boss that you have too much on your plate is to just have a conversation with them where you're like, I just want to go over my tasks, my projects, my whatever, so that I know that I'm prioritizing things correctly. Can we set up a time to talk about that? And then you sit down with your boss, you go over all the stuff that's on your plate. I know because I've done this with clients. I've had clients do this before. And 9 times out of 10, the boss is like, holy crap, you have way too much on your plate. Let me give some of this to someone else, right? So it might be useful that way. The other piece, another reason to go to your boss, assuming you have the kind of relationship where this works. Another reason to go to your boss is if they see all the stuff that you're doing and you're kind of killing it with all this stuff, that's how you get credit, right? That's how this stuff gets known. If you don't tell your boss all the cool stuff you're doing, they don't know, and you're not getting that promotion. But if you every now and then do this kind of a check-in with them, they know, and you might be getting that promotion. So in sharing that information and getting some help with prioritizing, if you can go to your boss, it's a good idea.
At least for me early on, I've had pretty good luck with keeping jobs longer term. If anybody relates, when they go into a job, they want to do everything. So everything feels urgent and they want to just take everything on because whether we know we have ADHD or not, we want to prove that we can do all the things until we're taxed. And then we keep taking on more things. And then everything can feel like it's urgent. And I think it can be hard to begin to prioritize what is important versus urgent versus I can move this or delegate this. So I would definitely, kind of echo what Brendan said, like talk to and communicate with your boss and advocate for yourself, which is so hard to do, especially if there is a pattern of I'm going to pick up everything and I'm going to do everything to show that I can stay, but it's not sustainable. So that communication is really important.
And I see a follow-up question in the chat about what if you're your own boss, leveraging accountability, like get an accountability team, work in a group setting. I mean, that's part of why my coaching groups are that they're groups, and we create teams in those groups. I have various people in my life who I share stuff with all the time for accountability. In fact, this particular coaching season, we're doing a little experiment where all like myself and MJ and Moira and all the admin, we are doing our own accountability team through a messaging app called Telegram, which also allows everybody else in the coaching groups to actually watch our accountability chat, which is actually really like motivating, knowing that like, oh man, people are like watching what I'm doing. I'm supposed to be the example, right? Which for me, like is totally motivating, and that totally works for me. And it's also a little bit scary, which means I'm doing the right thing, right? Because it's like, I got to report back. Here's the things that I said.
For me, because I'm also trying to sort of become my own boss right now too. I've had to like January to February, every week I'm creating a new schedule because I started to try to do too many things. And this accountability group and my own realization, like I'm not having any fun here, is how do I dial it back? How do I create a task list when I show it to other people that I know I'm going to be able to get it done? And I know that I'm going to have enough maneuverability within it to not be working all the way through. And help if you're going back to that question, prioritizing at work when everything feels urgent, and back to those dopamine hits. If I would always I wouldn't offer to help people. People come and ask me and I would help. I love helping. And those give me dopamine hits. And that can cause me to totally turn sideways in what I'm doing. So is it your stuff that's also on your plate, or is it doing other people's too?
Yeah, because urgent doesn't mean important. And that's a critical piece of this question, right? Is when everything feels urgent, but is it all important? Like someone else's problem might be urgent and you might be catching their urgency, but it's not important to you. So you don't need to care about it. Like you're allowed to go, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that right now.
Okay, can I ask each of you a question? I think this might be helpful for listeners. Realistically, how many items can you get done on in a given day on your to-do list?
3.
I knew Brandon's answer because I remember it.
Moira, what about you?
I mean, I know I could count on 3, but I could have anywhere between 3 and 20.
And get them done?
Get them done. On a power day, maybe 10, but 3 to 5 would be reasonable.
Okay. MJ, what about you?
5, I think, and it depends on the weight of the task, but yeah, 3 to 5.
Will?
3 to 5, and I was thinking with Moira's like a power day, you can get 10. That is also something I found, but then that kills me for the next day too, and then I get nothing done the second day.
True.
I noticed that in the beginning of doing this very public accountability team that I was rocking it the first week and a half, and then I was like, I just ran out of steam.
Why am I so tired?
Right.
That's why I keep the 3. That's my line. Yeah. And I usually do more than 3 things. I just only intend to do 3.
Yeah, I would say 2 to 5 on mine. Just kind of depends on the day. And I shared that because I think like people have part of coaching and like doing better with ADHD. Part of it is realizing you may actually be doing better than you realize. And it's understanding that like nobody gets 20 things done in a day. Like, sorry, nobody does. It doesn't happen. It's not real.
And that's where my to-done list comes in, right? I don't think I've talked about this in like a year and a half or something. But
done.
All it is at the end of the day, you write down 5 things you did. And then for tomorrow, you write down 3 things you got to do. And then you're always in the black because you're always writing down 2 more things than you're going to do tomorrow. And so you're never like in a hole. And it's also useful. I kept mine in a notebook because if I was rewriting the same thing, like, oh, I don't know, go to the bank or something, day after day after day, now I'm like, well, why am I not doing that? Like, and I would think about it in those terms as a problem to solve, not like, why am I not doing this? It would be like, what's getting in the way of me doing this? How come I'm not doing it? What's going to adjust? It depends on the thing.
Yeah. I usually share it with someone. Like I tell people that so I put this off now for 4 days in a row, or I add it to my calendar. So I sort of, it's almost like a what do they call it in like the corporate world where you escalate? Like, so the first thing is I just add it to my calendar. The next thing is like, all right, now I got to tell somebody else that I'm putting this thing off. Right. And cause it's when it doesn't even need to be logical. We can just have to like acknowledge, okay, here's this thing I need to do. And for whatever reason, like I can't get my ass to do it right now. Like help. All right. And ask for help is one of the best strategies you can do.
Yeah. And sometimes even like leveraging impulsivity can help, right? Like my whole anxiety is the only thing you can burn for fuel and wind up with more of it when you're done. Like sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes if I haven't gone to the bank, I'll stick with that example. If I'm like, oh crap, I haven't gone to the bank, I might be like, I'm just going to go to the bank right now and try to get that like impulsivity to get me out the door. And now I'm driving to the bank, right?
It's like the Mel Robbins 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Just do it.
Yeah.
5-second rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Mm-hmm.
So as someone who's formerly been anxious and ADHD, I like to put a lot of my daily routine things on my to-do task list because then I don't have to remember them and I'm just going back to the list. And it also helps me not forget them and get them done. So is that different than your task list?
For me, probably. I would have like a, this is the stuff I do every day list. And then I would have like a, this is the stuff I have to do today. Because those everyday items are kind of on autopilot, even if you still look at the list and that's part of the autopilot.
Unless you're changing your schedule every week right now. But yeah.
That's different.
Yeah. Okay.
So we are getting at the end here. We have one very simple question though from Vicky who asked, how do I get my ADHD under control? So there's a backlog currently of 362 episodes of ADHD Rewired.
171 for ADHD Essentials.
Yeah. Will, what are you at? You're close to 80.
62.
Exactly. 62. And we got new ones coming out. Learn as much as you can. Like that's the first, like most important thing to do is learn as much as you can about this, connect with your community. And don't try to do everything all at once. Like find 1 or 2 things to identify that you want to work on and work on those things. And I think that that's something that is sort of important for us to try to remember is that as people with ADHD, we want progress to happen yesterday, right? But we need to be patient with ourselves, right? Have a lot of self-compassion for ourselves. Because like when you have ADHD, first of all, just the idea of wanting to do better is awesome, right? The fact that you want to grow and do better, like give yourself credit and kudos for that because it's hard, but it's worth it. And it's not about not failing. It's about keep getting back up. That's the name of this game when you want to do better with ADHD. It's when something doesn't work that you try, ask yourself that curious why, right? Why didn't that work? Instead of judging yourself, So be curious, learn everything that you can. And then don't take yourself so seriously, because holy crap, some of the stuff we do is funny.
And to add on to that, like figuring out why something didn't work, I had started seeing a progression of like every second Tuesday of the month in the afternoon, I don't get a lot of stuff done. I find that, and so I'm like, oh, doing the live Q&A drains my executive functions, makes it harder to complete other things in the afternoon. I just added that as a reminder in my calendar to the thing so that I could work on that daily plan, being like, hey, this is going to happen. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm. And also, because we've had a couple of questions that sound like people who are kind of early to the ADHD diagnosis, contextually, just as like a pattern that happens for most folks, nothing is true for everybody, but for most folks, when you first get that diagnosis, it's not that your ADHD is suddenly worse. It's that you're suddenly more informed and noticing way more of the areas of your life that ADHD affects. And that can be overwhelming. That can slam you with guilt and shame and trauma and all the stuff we've already talked about today. But also know that that's normal. Bring some self-compassion, bring some self-forgiveness. Unfortunately, you just kind of have to ride that out as you learn and get better at managing your ADHD, or the meds kick in, or whatever the case may be. You'll get to the other side of that, but it's going to feel more acute for a little while, and then you'll get to the other side of that. So know that that's there.
And it's sort of the red car effect. You buy a red car, you suddenly notice all the red cars on the road, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we notice what we're paying attention to. So when you get diagnosed, you're starting to pay attention to all these things and seeing it through a different lens. All right. That is all the time that we have for today's Q&A. We do this every second Tuesday of the month. Be like Will, clear your calendar for it. He just happens to clear it now afterwards so he can recover. Sorry about that, Will, but I'm so happy that you join us. So thank you, everyone. If you found value in this live Q&A, whether you're here right now live, watching this on Facebook, or listening to this on the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. You can do that by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon, or just click on the Patreon button at the top of our website. And we now have ad-free episodes. So if you want more ADHD Rewired and less ads, well, you can do that for $5 a month. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone who was here asking questions. We couldn't do this without you. So until next time, be well, and we'll see you around. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHDrewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, ADHDrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You know, you might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus yet, check out Brene Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability, and if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brene still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brene, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.